so I don't know. One of the things I struggled over the most, though, recently has been this whole intelligent design issue that we got into with the DeVos campaign, because, I'm still getting emails in the last week or so that somehow I am, trying to create the agenda in this race, and that, and I mean, I'm trying to be as fair as I can. So quite frankly, I have to look at what I'm doing really closely. If I'm getting criticized like that, I don't just blow it off. I sit there and say, am I being as fair as I possibly can? In fact, I woke up my editor at 1 o'clock in the morning, the night that we first ran the story, saying, should I change this lead a little bit for the PM edition? Are we saying it absolutely correctly? And we talked about it for 45 minutes in the middle of the night, and finally he said, no. He goes, we're not going to change it because that's going to look like we're backing off, and what we say is absolutely correct. This is what he said. He said he would like to see this taught in science classes. And, we've put in the story that he thinks it should be up to the schools to decide. But he said flat out, and that's, but we had to run in the story that we had taped the interview. We ran in the story what question we asked, and I've never had to do that before. That was kind of a very strange feeling. But we felt, anytime somebody puts out a press release saying that your comment is inaccurate to all the media in the state, you want to make sure that you can justify what you've done. And my only real criticism of the campaign for that, because they're fine, they're allowed to criticize us as much as they want, but they said that, well, we didn't, our opponents did not bring up that issue, and our campaign did not bring up that issue, so therefore you're trying to create an issue. And my thought was, excuse me, but my job as a journalist is to ask the questions that I think the readers need to know. I didn't jump out from behind a bush and ask him this question. It was in the middle of a 40-minute taped phone interview about education issues for the education issue story I was going to do. And so that was disquieting to me. I don't know that it was an ethical issue, but like I said, I really did go back and think about it very hard to make sure that I was being as fair as I possibly could. But my bureau chief is one of the fairest and most unbiased people I know. He just celebrated his 30th anniversary in AP this week, and he takes that fairness thing very, very strictly. And when after 45 minutes looking at every which way in the middle of the night, he said, no, we're going with this, I was like, yeah, you're right. This is what we should be doing.
Kathy, if I could just follow up very briefly. Was there some equivocating that took place because of the pressure that you received, or because of the nature of the question, because it has religious overtones?
Equivocating on my
or at least some internal debate within yourself. Have we done it right? Have we covered it well?
Well, right. I mean, I was up at 1 o'clock in the morning because I couldn't go to sleep. I was still thinking about this. It's like, well, should I lead with the fact that he wants to leave it up to schools to decide, and then come back around and say that he would like to see it? And it's like, A, what difference does that make? I mean, the point is that he'd like to see it taught alongside science. But, it's not that I want to be liked, it's that I do want to be fair, though. And so I am going to question myself when somebody sits there. And, I mean, they pushed hard. I've never had somebody push this hard on an issue, I don't think, before. And so I wanted to make sure that I was absolutely being as fair as I could be. And like I said, once I looked at it, my bureau chief looked at it, we went back over exactly what the comment was. It's like, no, we're being very fair here, and this is what he said, and that we're sticking with that.
Ron, Charlie, any ethical propositions that jump to mind?
With a last name like mine, you usually deal with ethnical problems. But let me just briefly, if I can capsulize this, in the late 1980s, the city of Detroit was being reporters, and we sent them into every area of Metro Detroit where crack cocaine might be an issue, and they spent these 24 hours with people who were working at a party store and had to be behind bulletproof glass because of the crime that was going on. We were in a rehab center, we were at the morgue as bodies came in, and we were going to turn all of this, and it was started on Friday the 13th, which should have told us something. Started on Friday the 13th, and on Sunday the 15th, this was going to be in Sunday's paper, and it was 48 hours or 24 hours on Crack Street, and it was an unprecedented effort, what you call in the news business sort of a tick-tock, where we went 24 hours around the clock, and so the story was structured in such a way that, you know, at 6 a.m., so-and-so is doing this. At 6:02, a body arrives at the morgue, and we had all these reporters deployed, and it was a 12-page special section with photographs. The lead person in the entire project that was published that Sunday, the lead person was a guy named Danny, I think was his first name. And the lead of this long story was, it's 6 p.m. on a Friday night, and Danny is on the launching pad. And Danny was a crack addict, and Danny was trying to score crack cocaine that night. And we had assigned a reporter and a photographer to this guy. We'd heard about him from, I think, a rehab facility or something. He agreed to let us accompany him through the night. And the problem was Danny didn't have any money. And so the reporter and the photographer that I had assigned to stay with Danny throughout the night as he did this thing called fiending, which is this sort of frantic search for drugs when you've got to have it and you've got to do anything it takes to get it. And so he was fiending his way through some bars on the south side of Hamtramck, and he didn't really have any money, and what he had was a Walkman, and some of you might not know what that is, but it's a small portable cassette player that used to be popular, and now they're called iPods, but it was a little bit bigger. And he was trying to sell his Walkman so he could get $20 to buy crack, and he couldn't find a customer. Our photographer, who was a Pulitzer-Prize winner at the time, bought it off of him for $20 so that he had enough money to buy crack. Then he bought the crack, and then this photographer took a picture of him inhaling the crack, and that was the lead picture on the front of that section. We had, in effect, made it happen, and journalists aren't supposed to do that. So we had a real serious problem with that ethical issue. We had crossed the line. We had done a serious ethical breach. We had, in effect, manipulated and staged an event by making it possible for this guy to buy crack cocaine so that we could get a photograph and part of that story.
What happened?
We ended up, the photographer was suspended for a number of days. We did a very public front-page apology. It was written up in all the journalism publications. We did a very public front-page apology to readers. We withdrew the project from consideration for any sorts of awards or competition. We had to do a follow-up story. We wrote about what happened, just thoroughly embarrassed ourselves. We're as upfront as we could be, suspended the reporter who was with him, who did not tell us about this, and the photographer also, and then the photographer, within a few weeks of being suspended, decided to leave the paper. And the only way we found out about it was because the reporter who was with the photographer 2 days after the fact, when she was working on a follow-up story, had a conscience attack and came and told me what had happened and said, "Do you think there was a problem here?"
It's now in one of the ethics textbooks as well.
It should, yeah.
Ethics, in a way, like first, this was from a student. So one of the things that is difficult to figure out, perhaps when you're first starting, is what is off the record, when do you go off the record, what are you allowed to use, what's background. My first year covering Lansing, I thought I was a real bright guy, and I got up to Lansing, and for a year I was daily reminded of my ignorance. I didn't understand half of what was going on day to day, and it was very frustrating to me. So we had an end-of-the-year interview with Bill Milligan. It was Dave Ashenfelter, who's now at the Free Press, and myself. And we were going through, and I asked an honest-to-God question from the heart. I said, "Governor, how can you ever go home at night and think you possibly accomplished all you can? How can you keep track of what's going on? How can you possibly have a feel for all of these various... You've got problems in your prisons, you've got problems in your mental health system. How do you sleep? Doesn't this job get to be a pain in the neck?" Bill Milligan, who was nothing but a gentleman, just he never swore, he never had an ill word to say about anybody. He said, "It gets to be a pain in the ass." No, wait a minute, that's off the record. So we end the interview, and I go back, and my editor in Detroit says, "Well, what do you have?" I said, "Well, he really didn't say much." He said, "You just spent an hour with the governor of the state of Michigan, and you don't have a story?" I said, "Well, he did say the job got to be a pain in the ass." He goes, "Bingo." So we thought, but he said off the record. He says, "No, you can't say it after the fact." Even though it was the following sentence. So we put on the front page the next day, Bill Milligan said his job gets to be a pain in the ass. And Bill Milligan didn't like it much, and to this day, he still, when he goes and speaks to incoming governors, as he does on occasion, reminds them of that story. And in his book that just came out, he brought that story up, and George Weeks, who is his press secretary and later chief of staff came to my defense and said, nope, the governor was wrong, you can't call off the record after the fact. But it's something to think about. You know, had I been there by myself and not told my editor that, I don't think I would have used it. But the fact that, you know, he didn't say off the record before he said it. Now that's kind of a minor one, but that's a problem you're going to encounter a lot. What's off the record? What's background? You know, what can you tell me that I won't use from your name, but I will use that to go get the information in another way? These are ethical questions that you'll ask yourself often throughout your career.